A boy in Gaza wakes to the hum of drones. A girl in Tel Aviv falls asleep to the wail of sirens. They've never met, yet both are prisoners of a war they didn't start. To understand why they live like this, we must go back to promises made and broken. A century ago, farmers tilled these fields, Jews prayed at ancient stones, Arabs sold oranges in crowded markets. It wasn't paradise, but it wasn't this. Then came a letter from a British office, one that would ignite a century of mistrust. The 1917 Balfour Declaration promised Jews a homeland in Palestine without harming those already there. But how do you give a home without taking it from someone else? That contradiction was the fuse, and the clock began ticking. Under British rule, Jewish immigrants arrived in waves, fleeing persecution in Europe. To them, it was a return to the land of their ancestors. To Palestinians, it was the slow theft of their home, sanctioned by foreign powers. The 1929 Hebron massacre burned into memory. Arab mobs killed dozens of Jews. Jewish reprisals followed. Each side wrote its own story of the bloodshed, and both taught their children to remember. Then came the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered. Survivors stepped off ships in Palestine with nothing but trauma and hope. To Arabs already here, it felt like the world was solving Europe's crimes by taking Arab land. By 1947, violence between Jews and Arabs had spiraled out of control. The UN proposed splitting the land in two. Jews, desperate for security, said yes. Arabs, losing more than half their home, said no. War was inevitable. In 1948, Jewish leaders declared the State of Israel. For Israelis, it was freedom at last. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 fled or were forced out. Many still keep the keys to homes they never saw again. Arab armies invaded. Israel survived and expanded its territory. Palestinians became refugees in camps across the region. Their dream of return turned from a hope into an inheritance passed down like a family heirloom. For Israel, survival meant military strength. For Palestinians, survival meant holding on to the memory of what was lost. Both nations began building identities around what they feared and what they could never forget. In 1967, fearing attack, Israel struck first. 6 days later, it controlled the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, Sinai, and the Golan Heights. For Jews, Jerusalem was reunified. For Palestinians, it was occupied, brick by brick. The occupation changed daily life overnight. Soldiers at every road, permits to travel, land seized for settlements. Israelis saw it as security. Palestinians saw it as slow erasure. Both believed they were protecting their future. In 1973, on Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria attacked. The war shook Israel's sense of invincibility. For Palestinians, it proved that force could challenge Israel's control, even if the cost was high. In 1987, frustration boiled over. The First Intifada erupted, children throwing stones at tanks, shopkeepers shutting doors in protest. Israel cracked down hard. The world saw David and Goliath in reverse. A new player rose, Hamas. Part militia, part social movement, it promised resistance and Islamic governance. To some Palestinians, it was protection. To others, including Israel, it was a dangerous rejection of peace. In 1993, Oslo seemed like hope. Leaders shook hands. Palestinians got limited self-rule. But refugees stayed in camps, settlements kept growing, and Jerusalem stayed in dispute. Peace had loopholes, and those gaps became fault lines. Extremists moved to kill the deal. Hamas bombed buses in Israel. In 1995, an Israeli extremist assassinated Prime Minister Rabin. The dream of two states began to fade under the weight of grief and mistrust. The Second Intifada, starting in 2000, was bloodier. Suicide bombings and Israeli raids left cities in ruins. Israel built a separation barrier, a wall to Israelis, a prison to Palestinians. In 2005, Israel left Gaza. Many hoped it was the first step toward peace. But when Hamas took control, Israel and Egypt blockaded the Strip. 2 million people became trapped in one of the most crowded places on earth. Wars between Israel and Hamas became regular. 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021. Rockets rained on Israeli towns. Airstrikes flattened Gaza's neighborhoods. Both sides called it self-defense. Both sides buried their children. In Gaza, life became survival. 4 hours of electricity a day, water too salty to drink, unemployment above 40%. A teenager might never leave the Strip, not because of prison walls, but because the whole place is a prison. In the West Bank, settlements kept expanding. Hilltops that once held olive trees now held rows of red-roofed houses for Israelis. Palestinians watched their land vanish, one permit and bulldozer at a time. Inside Israel, Arab citizens could vote, work, and study, but many felt like second-class citizens. In 2018, a law declared Israel the nation-state of the Jewish people. For Arabs, it felt like being written out of the country's story. In 2021, tensions in Jerusalem exploded. Families in Sheikh Jarrah faced eviction. Police stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan. Hamas fired rockets. Israel answered with bombs. The cycle repeated: violence, funerals, shattered glass. Then came October 7th, 2023. Hamas fighters broke through the fence, killing and kidnapping civilians. For Israel, it was the deadliest day in its history. For Gaza, it was the start of the deadliest war it had ever faced. Israel's response was massive. Airstrikes hit densely packed neighborhoods. Entire families were erased in seconds. Gaza's hospitals overflowed, morgues ran out of space. Israel said it was targeting Hamas. Gazan said no one was safe. In Israel, funerals filled the weeks after the attack. Survivors told stories of hiding in closets, of hearing loved ones murdered. Anger hardened into resolve. Hamas must be destroyed. In Gaza, parents dug through rubble with their hands. A father found his daughter's shoe, but not her body. His grief turned to rage. Israel must be stopped. 2 peoples, 2 wounds, each seeing themselves as the victim. The war became a war of images. Videos of rockets, bombings, and dead children spread online. Each side accused the other of lies. Each side showed the world its pain and blocked out the others. International voices split. Some called Hamas terrorists. Others called Israel an apartheid state. Everyone claimed the moral high ground, but few had answers that both sides could live with. In the West Bank, raids intensified. Israel said it was targeting militants. Palestinians saw entire neighborhoods humiliated. Night arrests pulled teenagers from their beds. Fear became as common as the call to prayer. In Israeli towns near Gaza, families lived with seconds of warning before rockets hit. Children learned to run to shelters before they learned to ride a bike. The sound of the Iron Dome intercepting missiles was a lullaby and a nightmare. Gaza's blockade kept tightening. Building materials were restricted, fishing zones shrank, medical patients waited months for permits. Hamas said resistance was the only answer. Israel said lifting the blockade would arm its enemy. For Palestinians, the right of return remained sacred. For Israelis, it felt like an existential threat. Millions of Palestinians flooding into their state. Each side feared that the other's justice meant their own destruction. Peace talks became photo ops. Leaders shook hands for cameras, then returned home to tell their people why compromise was impossible. Trust, already fragile, shattered with every failed summit. On social media, the war was constant. One video showed an Israeli mother clutching her baby in a bomb shelter. The next, a Palestinian child pulled from rubble. Millions watched, but the pain didn't translate into action. Every war left scars you couldn't see. An Israeli soldier who shot a teenager at a checkpoint. A Palestinian boy who grew up without a single family member untouched by prison or death. Trauma became heritage. Some in Israel dreamed of annexing the West Bank completely. Some Palestinians dreamed of liberating all of historic Palestine. Each vision erased the other's right to exist, and both had armed followers ready to try. In 2024, clashes spread. Settlers attacked Palestinian villages. Palestinian gunmen ambushed Israeli cars. Tit for tat, wound for wound. Revenge replaced strategy. The UN called it unsustainable. But for those living it, unsustainable was normal. You got used to rationing water. You got used to checkpoints. You got used to funerals. The unbearable became routine. The tragedy is that both stories are true, and they contradict each other. Jews see a miracle of survival after centuries of exile and genocide. Palestinians see a theft backed by bullets and borders. Both refuse to forget. When you ask who started it, the answer depends on where you start the clock. 1948, 1917, 70 AD. Each date changes the villain, and both sides know exactly which one to choose. Global powers use the conflict like a chessboard. Weapons flow in, aid flows in, but peace never does. For some governments, an unresolved Israel, Palestine is more useful than a resolved one. Ordinary people, however, have nothing to gain from the status quo. An Israeli taxi driver who lost his brother. A Palestinian nurse who lost her home. Their grief doesn't fit neatly into political slogans. In some places, small bridges are built, joint businesses, shared schools. But they are fragile. One bombing, one stabbing, one airstrike, and years of trust can disappear overnight. The irony is brutal. Both peoples want safety for their children. Yet every rocket, every raid, every reprisal makes that future less likely. Security and freedom remain locked in a zero-sum game. In refugee camps, kids grow up hearing stories of villages they've never seen. In Israeli classrooms, kids grow up learning the names of towns their grandparents built from desert. Both grow up sure they are the rightful heirs. For every Israeli who says, "We have no partner for peace," there's a Palestinian who says, "We have no partner for justice." The stalemate isn't just political. It's emotional, spiritual, generational. And still, in quiet corners, some resist the cycle. An imam and a rabbi share coffee in Jaffa. A former soldier and a former prisoner run workshops together. They are the exception, but they exist. Ask them why they bother, and they'll tell you. Because hate is easy and hope is hard. But without hope, this place will keep burying its children. The land between the river and the sea is too small for endless war. The walls that divide it are built not just from concrete, but from fear. And fear is harder to dismantle than stone. Every checkpoint, every blockade, every rocket launch is a symptom. The disease is mistrust, fed by history and watered with blood. No treaty will work unless it addresses that sickness. The question isn't whether there's enough land. The question is whether there's enough will to share it. That's the part no one can give. It has to be chosen. History will judge the leaders here, but it will also judge the people for what they demanded, for what they tolerated, and for what they refused to do in the name of peace. One day, the guns will fall silent. The only question is whether it will be because both sides chose it or because neither side was left standing. An Israeli grandmother still remembers the night she fled Europe with nothing. A Palestinian grandfather still keeps the key to the house his family lost. They are both right, and they are both wrong. If the world can't hold both truths at once, it will keep taking sides, and taking sides has never ended this war. Peace won't come from denying the other's pain. It will come from looking it straight in the eye and deciding to care anyway. Maybe one day, a boy in Gaza and a girl in Tel Aviv will meet, not as enemies, but as neighbors. And maybe they'll wonder why it took their parents so long to figure it out. Until then, the story of Israel and Palestine remains unfinished, waiting for someone brave enough to write an ending that doesn't begin with "Once upon a time, we were at war."